Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending your time zone. Thank you very much for joining us for this last panel within the 8th edition of the GPP. It is a really pleasure having you with us today again. Muy buenos días, muchas gracias a todos ustedes por añadirse, por sumarse una vez más a esta sesión final del Global Pensions Program. And before we start, I would like to remind all of you with a few technical issues. Since presentations will be in English in this panel and in Spanish in the last presentation, for participants who wish to hear the interpretation, you will find an icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. If you click on this icon, you will have the option to choose the language. Los speakers de esta primera sesión, de este panel, hablarán en inglés y el señor ministro de Inclusión y Seguridad Social hablará en español. Para todos aquellos que deseen escuchar la interpretación, podrán presionar el icono que figura en la parte inferior de sus pantallas, donde pone interpretación, y seleccionar el idioma en el que deseen hacerlo. During the presentations, your cameras and microphones will be off, and you can send your questions in the Q&A part of your screen. Since we might receive many questions, we apologize in advance for not being able to respond to all of them. We will include as many questions as time allows us. This is a double session without stop. First, we have the multilateral organisms panel, and afterwards, the closing remarks by the Spanish Social Security Minister. But as in the other sessions, before we move forward, however, we would like to know who is in the room with us. A question will pop up on your screen right now, asking you about the role that each of you are playing in your country. Please take just a minute to answer the questions. We are looking forward to your answers. Okay, that's the result. As in other sessions, there are a majority of people working from the public sector, more than a half. Thank you very much, all of you. And once again, I invite you to ask your questions through this webinar by sending them via the Q&A session. And I will also like to let you know that the sessions will be recorded and made available as a video file on the program's website in the following days. Now I invite you to make, all the panelists, to make your presentations, around 12 minutes each one. And I will let you know if your time is close to expire. We are going to follow the order that we have in the program. First of all, Mariano Bosch. Mariano is acting Labor Markets Division Chief of the Inter-American Development Bank. After him, we will have Gustavo De Marco, is the Pension Global Lead at the World Bank. Saba Feher is a Senior Economist and Pension Specialist in the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department. Later, Pablo Antolin, head of the Funded Pension Unit, Deputy Director of the Insurance, Pension and Capital Market Division of the OECD. And finally, Vinicius Piñeiro, Deputy Director General and Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today. And Mariano, tu turno, por favor.
Gracias, Diego, por la presentación. Déjeme compartir una pequeña presentación para guiar mis comentarios, que espero se restrinjan al tiempo que me han asignado. Y básicamente lo que yo quiero traer a esta discusión, y será muy bueno compartir con los compañeros de otras instituciones multilaterales, es que para mí uno de los puntos centrales donde se ha de construir e invertir en mejorar y adaptar los sistemas de pensiones a las nuevas realidades son las instituciones que los gobiernan. Y déjenme, porque ese va a ser mi punto central en estos 10 minutos. Yo el otro día les hablé un poquito de este marco conceptual que de alguna manera nos plantea cuáles son los potenciales desequilibrios que pueden ocurrir en los sistemas de pensiones, ya sea en el área de cobertura, porque no llegamos a la gran mayoría de adultos mayores, en el área de adecuación, porque las pensiones no son suficientes para tener una vejez digna, o en el área de sostenibilidad, donde encontramos que muchos países pueden encontrar dificultades en el pago de sus pensiones. Déjenme simplemente poner algunos números en este tipo de triángulos para mostrar cuáles son los desequilibrios que van a surgir de manera casi natural en muchos sistemas, ¿no? Si ponemos algunos números en cuáles son estos vértices, por ejemplo, en el de sostenibilidad, hasta qué punto las contribuciones pueden pagar las pensiones, en el de cobertura, qué porcentaje de personas están cubiertas por una pensión, en este caso contributiva, y en el de suficiencia, por poner un nivel de pensión como tasa de reemplazo del 40% que se recoge en algunos tratados internacionales. Pues si vemos un país como Costa Rica hoy, sería una cosa así. Yo elijo Costa Rica como podría haber elegido cualquier otro país. Costa Rica hoy cubre alrededor de la mitad de su población, con una pensión que es relativamente generosa, 75% del último salario, y a día de hoy, pues las contribuciones más o menos cubren el pago de pensión. Pero si observamos qué es lo que va a pasar hacia adelante, y esto lo hemos estado discutiendo en este curso bastante, bueno, lo que vamos a observar es que en América Latina y en el Caribe el aceleramiento del envejecimiento poblacional va a ser muy impactante. De hecho, este gráfico lo que nos representa es cuántos años va a tardar cada uno de estos países en pasar del 10% de adultos mayores al 20%. Y aquí un mensaje central que hemos venido discutiendo en este curso es que en América Latina y el Caribe este proceso va a ser mucho más rápido que lo que ha sido en otros países, en Europa, por ejemplo. En el caso de Costa Rica, esto va a ocurrir, no ha empezado todavía, pero va a ocurrir en 22 años, cuando en los países europeos ocurrió en 60 o en 70 años. Bueno, pues nuestro desequilibrio va a venir por algo, como así este triángulo se va a deformar un poquito, y lo que vamos a encontrar es que el principal desequilibrio que va a surgir en estos sistemas de beneficio definido, como es el costarricense, va a ser que vamos a tener menos capacidad de pagar las pensiones. En el 2050 las contribuciones solo pueden financiar el 40% del pago de pensiones, y entonces va a haber un déficit, que es algo que ya hemos venido hablando, pero creo que es importante enmarcarlo en este concepto de desequilibrio. Si vamos a los sistemas de beneficio definido, bueno, pues el desequilibrio va a venir fundamentalmente porque cada vez las pensiones van a ser más bajas debido al envejecimiento poblacional, y este es el caso de República Dominicana, pero también nos va a ocurrir, le ha venido ocurriendo a Chile y va a ocurrir en otros países de contribución definida. El punto central que quería traer yo a la discusión hoy es que básicamente todos estos desequilibrios se deben a la parametrización de muchos de los sistemas. Pero un verdadero déficit que tenemos en muchos países de nuestra región es que no existen instituciones que gobiernen esos desequilibrios y que adapten el sistema a esos cambios que surgen desde el ámbito demográfico, también desde el ámbito económico y probablemente también van a ocurrir como respuesta a los cambios tecnológicos y cambios en nuestro mercado de trabajo. Y entonces necesitamos instituciones que de alguna manera detecten esos desequilibrios y sean capaces de corregir el sistema o por lo menos proponer correcciones al sistema. Y aquí remarco dos tipos de, digamos, funciones que creo que son importantes. Una de la pura administración y supervisión del sistema continuada y la otra, instituciones que nos ayuden a adaptar el sistema a todos estos cambios. En la parte de administración, yo creo que hay importantes déficits en muchas áreas en la región. Yo marco tres. Hay muchos países que conforme el BID va dando asistencia técnica, y esto creo que también ocurre con el Banco Mundial, nos encontramos que tienen importantes lagunas en el manejo de sus sistemas tecnológicos, en cómo manejan las historias laborales, en cómo se definen los beneficios, etc. Entonces, esto es un área donde se puede mejorar mucho y fortalecer las instituciones. Al mismo tiempo, también tenemos grandes problemas en tanto la fiscalización de contribuciones, el recaudo de contribuciones en muchos países. La informalidad es algo que es uno de los grandes fenómenos de nuestros mercados laborales, y en el control de fraude en algunos de nuestros sistemas. Y otro de los problemas que nos encontramos muchas veces en nuestro diálogo con los países es a la falta de capacidad de planificación financiera y actuarial, así como a la rendición de cuentas a la sociedad de qué es lo que está pasando con el sistema. Muchas veces en nuestro diálogo con los países es difícil tener una foto clara de hacia dónde va el sistema en términos financieros y actuariales y cuáles son las palancas que pueden corregir ese sistema y ponerlo otra vez en equilibrio. Desde el punto de vista de esta otra capacidad que yo les comentaba que creo que es muy importante, es cómo podemos adaptar el sistema ante un desequilibrio que hemos detectado. Bueno, una parte importante de la presentación de Peter en Diamond el lunes fue justamente de hablar de cómo pueden los países imponer reglas de ajuste que vayan adaptando el sistema conforme vayan cambiando las realidades económico y demográficas. Pero también hay otro tipo de instituciones que podemos pensar, órganos consultivos, consejos actuariales que vayan monitoreando detenidamente el sistema y vayan dando las voces de alerta de cuándo tenemos que cambiar determinados parámetros. Incluso otros países pues, deciden tener comisiones parlamentarias que justamente intenten sacar del debate político diario este tema de las pensiones, que tiene que tener una visión más de largo plazo. Y aquí el mensaje central que yo creo que tenemos que llevar a los países es que es muy importante cambiar los parámetros y obviamente fijar cuál es el sistema, tanto en su parte de financiamiento como en su parte de beneficios, pero la construcción de estas instituciones es igualmente importante, yo creo. Muchas veces damos mucho peso en las reformas a cómo vamos a cambiar determinado parámetro, pero damos relativamente poco peso a cómo podemos fortalecer estas instituciones que tienen que mirar todo el corto plazo, la administración del sistema, como el largo plazo de cómo vamos a adaptar el sistema en un futuro que, como ya dije en mi presentación el martes, pienso que es fundamental. Yo creo que hay 4 grandes ventajas de invertir en estas instituciones. Uno es que muchas veces esta discusión de mejora institucional no está tan cargada políticamente como si otras discusiones, por ejemplo, de cambio en la edad de retiro, cambio en la tasa de contribución. Por lo tanto, podemos tener esta conversación de cómo genero yo unas buenas instituciones independientes para que adapten el sistema, que limite los riesgos de economía política. En muchos casos, ofrece ganancias en el corto plazo. Por ejemplo, si mejoramos la administración del sistema, la información que le proveemos al afiliado o al cotizante, eso da inmediatamente una sensación de que el servicio público del sistema pensional está mejorando. Al mismo tiempo, sienta las bases para, de alguna manera, afrontar los desequilibrios que nos vamos a enfrentar. Si no tenemos una idea clara de dónde está el sistema, y esto ocurre en muchos países, es difícil plantear la necesidad de reforma. O es difícil incluso tener la discusión de reforma porque no se tienen los datos en el momento pertinente. Y luego tener estas instituciones que monitoreen continuamente el mercado de trabajo y el sistema de pensiones nos permiten mantener vivo el diálogo sobre reforma pensional, incluso aunque no se den las condiciones económico-políticas para avanzar en una reforma. Y aquí recojo una idea que también mencioné el martes, que es: no vamos a necesitar una única reforma de pensiones en la región. Yo creo que tenemos que empezar a cambiar un poquito el mindset de que los sistemas se van a solucionar con una reforma cada 10 años o cada 15 años, sino que el sistema, si queremos que esas adaptaciones no sean tan traumáticos como están resultando en muchas de las discusiones que observamos ahora en la región, sino que sean más bien suaves y recurrentes, bueno, pues tenemos que tener ese diálogo de manera continua. Y aquí acabo. Simplemente quería traer a colación que creo que hay un debate muy importante que tener sobre instituciones alrededor de los sistemas pensionales. Obviamente tenemos que juntar ese debate con cómo reformamos las cosas urgentes, los parámetros, pero como ya mencioné en mi presentación antes el martes, creo que una reforma de pensiones que no siente las bases institucionales para una adaptación continua del sistema va a ser una oportunidad perdida en los siguientes años. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mariano. Please, Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Estoy tratando de compartir la pantalla. No sé si se ve la presentación.
Sí, sí, sí.
Ok.
Si la puedes poner en modo presentación, ahí la tienes. Are you going to speak in English?
Yes, I'm going to speak.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief so that we have time for discussion, and I have the advantage of coming after a number of sessions where some of the issues that I'm planning to present have already been discussed. So I can be brief, and I'm also going to take advantage of the fact that Mariano has used a similar first slide that presents objectives and challenges of the pension system. This presents a bit of a more complex set of objectives, but basically also puts focus on the issues of sustainability, adequacy, coverage, fairness, and incentives. And the first observation is that most of the pension systems in which we work worldwide show a lot of shortcomings regarding these main objectives. Coverage is low, pension systems are not sustainable, and pension systems are regressive. So on the first issue of coverage, we see that self-employment and people who do not contribute to the pension system are a vast majority in several regions in the world, and particularly in the least developed countries. There's more than 50%, 50, 60 to 90% of the people who do not contribute to pension systems, and a large number of them are self-employed. And this is changing in a direction. Particularly self-employment is becoming increasingly more common. The other observation concerning coverage is that despite the fact that we know coverage is low worldwide, and that many countries and many policymakers have been trying to correct this has not changed over time. If we look at the coverage rates of the mid-90s and the 2010s, for which we have a number of observations here, we could do the same for 2020s, and it's not going to change too much. We will see that the coverage rates have been persistently the same in most of the countries where we have made these observations. So this is a problem, and this is a problem that is not changing regardless of the efforts that have been made in the past couple of decades. On sustainability, I'm going to pass very quickly the slide on the demographic trends, because a lot has been discussed about this, the aging of populations. Let me just say that aging is not a pure demographic matter. First of all, there are aged countries and there are young countries, and we work mostly at the World Bank in countries that do not have this strong pressure of an aged population, but these are countries that are aging very fast. So the world is not divided between aged and young countries. The world is divided between aged countries and aging countries. And aging countries are aging faster than the aged countries did. It seems, play with words, but it's very important to note that many of the countries that are young today, or that are not aged today, will age in a very, very short period of time. And last observation is that for young countries, or for younger countries, it's not only the fact that they're aging, but the fact that they have not used the youth bulge to create a real demographic dividend. So young countries, not because they are young, they have a demographic dividend. So there's a lot of economic implications behind the issue of using the youth bulge to create a demographic dividend is not something that will automatically happen. The second thing that I want to say about sustainability is that sustainability is not only an issue that is related with demographic trends. There are also parametric inconsistencies in the way the pension systems have been designed. And this graph shows that if we do an exercise trying to compare the present value of contributions with the present value of pension rights worldwide, there's a line that shows the equilibrium, and any country that shows outside this line will not be sustainable, based not on the demographics, nothing to do with the demographics, but just on the parameters, the way the parameters have been set. And this is an observation that many actuarial analyses show, but it's not just an actuarial analysis what is needed. I'm not saying that actuarial analysis is not important, it's very important, but the thing is, sometimes we can have an actuarial assessment and we can realize that the pension system is not sustainable, but then you know, making the corrections and why these inconsistencies are not corrected goes well beyond doing a good diagnosis. It has to do with issues that have been discussed in this course, such as behavioral economics. It has to do with political economy, it has to do with the vested interest of some groups. It has to do with perceptions. Finally, let me say something about fairness, which is another important dimension. There are many, many angles from which the pension systems worldwide are regressive. And this may be unintentionally or it may be by design. And so I gave a few examples. The fiscal support that many countries do to pension systems that are covering half of the population or less than half of the population is a redistribution from taxpayers you know, to the covered populations. The benefit formulas that use the last salary benefit the workers who have steep earning paths compared with those that have flat earning paths. And this is a regressive redistribution. Similar thing happens with the early retirement that benefits the better off workers. And also with the retirement age of women, that is something very sensitive politically, but many countries in the world have lower retirement ages for women. So incentives are also in the wrong directions. I think I'm running out of time, and I need to mention a couple of more things, but I will present the issue of incentives to retire at a younger age, where this is allowed, and the incentives to underreport salaries and lack of incentives to move to private sector jobs and to participate in the labor force, particularly in the case of women. Now, the changing nature of work is also changing the perspective, and we need to focus more on pension schemes that look not so much at the traditional forms of employment, but also to flexible works and self-employment. We will need in the future a stronger focus on the digital economy, and we will need to think more carefully at a combination of contributory and non-contributory pension schemes. This is a reference. This slide says something about the importance of the digital economy, but let me pass. This is a slide that shows how a combination of some guaranteed minimum income with mandated and nudged incentivized and privately financed pension schemes will probably be a way to address some of the challenges of the changing world. And what's happening with the COVID emergency and the post-COVID recovery? Well, first of all, although there have been a number of approaches during the COVID emergency to use pension schemes, and I'm showing here, you know, to use the pension schemes to support the crisis with social security contributions, let's say waivers of contributions, some adjustments of pension top-ups, administrative reforms, particularly in payment systems, regulations for withdrawals and advance payments of pensions. But still, there's a lot of things that need to happen. There are two main lessons from this group of interventions. And one of them is that we need to pay more attention to technology, to the use of technology. And also, we need to think a bit more carefully of the way of combining, of articulating different social insurance programs. We tended to think, and we have heard a lot about not using pension funds for other purposes other than pensions. And I think we might want to reconsider these from several angles, not only from the needs of emergency perspective, but also as a way to promote some kind of combined incentives to save for pensions and other social insurance programs. I will stop here, and I'll try to give some space for questions.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, for the time. Please, Saba, it's your turn.
Thank you. I will try my best to master the technology. Very good. And share screen. Here we go. Can you see the slide?
No, not at all.
You cannot?
No. You are sharing your screen, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to share my screen.
Yeah, but not the presentation.
Okay. All right, so, okay.
Here it is.
All right,
That's
okay.
fine.
I'm sorry. So thank you very much. I will try to avoid repeating the things that have already been said. And I will try to focus a little bit more on the IMF view on the impact of COVID and the attendant economic downturn. So the impact of this crisis, we believe, depends very much on the preconditions, the prevailing conditions in every country at the time of the outbreak. And as previous speakers and other speakers during the conference already mentioned, there are all these well-known sustainability, adequacy, equity, efficiency issues in practically most or all public pension schemes. I would like to draw attention to just maybe two issues, because most of them have already been mentioned. One is that sustainability of public pension systems, financial sustainability, will be impacted by the current crisis, because the current crisis will lead to higher public debt. Higher public debt and lower growth, at least temporarily. And that will have an impact on sustainability in terms of the capacity of countries to finance their pension expenditures and the risk of pension expenditures crowding out other public spending. I will skip the rest of this slide because much of it has already been mentioned. But I would like to add one more thing in terms of the preconditions, is that aging is not so much a biological issue for us who work on pensions. I think aging is primarily an issue of productivity. Aging is an issue of age-specific productivity and employability. And therefore, every country will need to work very hard to make sure that as people start to retire later, which is a typical policy objective of governments, they actually can be employed because their productivity can be maintained through continuing education, through improved healthcare, and also through economic structures, sectoral structures that can actually employ late career workers. Now, do we think that this crisis is different? I mean, every now and then we tend to have crises. I mean, every decade has its own crisis. But is it different or is it not? And obviously, the diplomatic answer is yes and no. And it is different for a number of reasons. One is this is a health crisis. This is a global health crisis, something that we have no experience of. Last time we had an experience of this, we were living in a much less interconnected world. It's also different because we have very little control over the underlying reason, which is the virus itself. And also is different because there is just simply no sector which is left unaffected by this crisis. Even the most basic functions of the state are at risk of discontinuation. In terms of the impact, I think we can at least theoretically expect three types of impact. One, we could imagine a situation where the crisis itself creates new problems. We can imagine a situation where the crisis actually addresses problems that we are already living with. And the third is that maybe the crisis will not add new problems, it will not solve old problems, but simply function as a catalyst, make things more visible, make certain progressions, certain processes go faster or slower. Now, after doing some analysis, looking at the demographic impact of the crisis, our institutional view is that we saw no reason to assume a secular shift or secular change in any of the underlying trends that determine the near future of public pension schemes, of public pension systems, and therefore we view the crisis more as a catalyst. Now, just a few words, really just a few words on the IMF's institutional mandate, because it is different from that of the World Bank or ILO or IDB or others. First of all, our horizon tends to be shorter. We look ahead 5 years, 6 years at most, because that's how our mandate has been set up. And also, our primary focus is the fiscal landscape. And although we do understand and pay attention to the adequacy, equity, efficiency angles of sustainability, our primary focus is what happens fiscally. But in this case, that is actually very much in line with our view of the crisis, because as I mentioned, we see no reason to initiate parametric or structural, we see no reason to initiate paradigm shifts or structural reforms in response to the crisis. But we do see reason to continue the parametric adjustments that have already begun. So what is the bottom line? What would be the typical policy response that the IMF would recommend to its member countries? Well, obviously we have the critical assumption that eventually the pandemic will be brought under control. I don't even want to think about what happens if it takes more than a year ahead of us to bring it under control. So our basic policy response is that we do not believe that structural reforms or paradigmatic changes should be driven by COVID itself or by the pandemic or the attendant economic crisis itself. Partly because we just don't know too much about the nature of this crisis, and it would be probably premature to set pension systems on a path that would determine their fate over the long run, although we only have a very constrained horizon yet. But we also recommend to countries that if they have started reforms, whatever reforms they may be, typically parametric reforms, they should not be stopped. They should progress, if possible, without being slowed down. Although we also recommend to them that they should take into account the immediate interplay between welfare considerations and the objectives of these parametric reforms. We typically do not recommend to countries to start fiddling with their pension system, but rather to try to help in protecting jobs, productive networks, human capital. If you wish, we try to induce them and help them to maintain those factors which eventually feed into the performance of these pension systems and pension schemes. And we also view this crisis as an opportunity, although I'm not sure we emphasize it too often, because it kind of sheds light. It sheds light on problems that maybe, I wouldn't say they went unnoticed, or maybe did not deserve sufficient attention. One of these is what many other people have already mentioned here, is maybe there will be a renewed interest in basic pensions or ensuring that the poverty alleviation function of pension system actually reaches everyone. Maybe this will be a call to revise funding rules and explore investment opportunities, asset classes outside traditional markets and instruments. So while we do not expect countries to act straight away in response to COVID, we hope that some of the learning, some of the analysis of the problems will stay with governments. And once normalcy resumes, they will be interested in such steps that make it easier to address similar crises in the future. And I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Saba. So it's turn of Pablo. Pablo, when you like, thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego. Thank you very much, everybody, and for the opportunity to present the view of the OECD. I'm going to talk shortly, very concisely, to address the following message. How can we strengthen the resilience of retirement savings? And for this, we need, just a moment, okay. We need to look at what is the purpose, what are the of retirement savings, what are the risks and the challenges that retirement savings face. So in a very simple way, the main purpose of retirement savings, of saving for retirement, is to make sure that people will have resources, they will have money to finance retirement once they reach retirement. And we know, and a lot of people have talked about it, that there is investment risks. There are big shocks before retirement. Financial markets can fall enormously like it did in 2008 and also in February, March this year as a result of COVID-19. And there is a volatility in financial markets, which is important to keep in mind. And also there is longevity risk in the sense that people might outlive their resources, and it's important that people have resources to finance their retirement, meaning from the day they retire to the day they pass away. What are the challenges? Well, Olivia has already spoken this morning quite a lot about the idea that there are challenges that were here before COVID and they're still here, and then there is COVID. So I just want to emphasize this point because I think it's very important that we have, as many people have already talked about it, we have population aging and also an environment of low growth and low returns. Low growth and low returns, which have been creating a lot of problems. Basically, the main idea is that for the same savings, the same amount of contribution, the same contribution periods, meaning then the same number of years contributed, as Olivia shows much better, basically what we have is that people will have lower annual retirement income. The overall amount of retirement income is the same. What people call in the literature, in the jargon, the pension wealth is the same. The thing is just have to cover a longer period, and the same amount of savings is going to fetch lower accumulated retirement income because the investment of those savings is going to return less, unless pension funds or individuals move to riskier investment. But as we know, if you increase risk, you also increase the probability that people will not have enough retirement savings. And this is what we had before at the beginning of this year. These are important problems that were here, are here, and will be here tomorrow. And on top of that, we have COVID-19. COVID-19 obviously is a shock that affects the economy and all economies as a whole, and there are many impacts here. And I would like to highlight two issues. One is the financial needs due to the economic impact of the pandemic have led in many countries for people to access the retirement savings. This will have an impact on the savings, on the retirement savings that people will have tomorrow. There will be less assets, there will be a reduction in the compound interest earning, there will be problem of liquidity for pension funds, and also brings problems with managing long-term investments. And also, COVID-19 brings the problem that people have a lower capability to contribute to retirement saving plans due to the fact that they're experiencing a reduction in wages, or they have lost their jobs altogether. And employers might not be able to continue or to contribute to the retirement saving plans of individuals, which will lead to lower savings, lower future retirement income adequacy problems. And of course, we had before also the problem that there was a lot of people moving into what is called non-standard forms of work and low-income people. And COVID-19 might be creating more problems to this group of workers that their retirement saving arrangement that exists in many OECD countries do not provide them with the schemes or the arrangements for them to save for retirement. But there are other challenges, and what we have done in the OECD is to look at the challenges that country has been facing, at the policies that countries have been implemented to face these challenges in the context of COVID-19. And we have the decrease of value of assets in retirement saving accounts from falling financial markets. The message is to stay the course and limit the materialization of investment losses. And communications have been one of the main processes that countries have used to address this issue. There has been an increase in liabilities from falling interest rates in retirement saving arrangements that have promises. And of course, the important thing here is to secure the solvency of retirement plans and the business of provider. And one of the main policies that have been implemented by regulators and policymakers is to lengthen the recovery periods of DB plans to meet funding requirements. The lower capability, I have already mentioned about it. And one key thing, and that some countries have implemented, they have implemented programs subsidizing wages and subsidizing contributions. So people have been able to continue contributing to the retirement saving plans. And this is important. Unfortunately, they are not all the countries at the OECD, but some countries have done it. And this is important because if there is no money coming into retirement savings, there will be less money to finance retirement tomorrow. Two things that has happened during COVID-19 that are quite important to highlight, and people, regulators, policymakers, but also pension funds have been reacting to it, is operational disruptions, basically due to the fact that a lot of people is working remotely. So improving online procedures has been one of the mechanisms put forward by a lot of institutions, and also cyber attacks, frauds, and scams. And here, there have been a lot of plans and procedures to provide warning to members, to provide tips and information to members in order for them to be able to understand the frauds and the scam and not to fall into them. And finally, there has been a reduction in savings and compound interest earned from policies that countries have implemented, well-aimed policies to provide short-term relief, but we also have to take into account that sometimes policies have long-term implications, and the main message from the OECD is that access to retirement savings it's a measure of last resort. It should be based on individual specific hardship circumstances. So here we have, again, the policies, the challenges, the policies, and the countries. The slides will be available, so I'm not going to go into detail for the sake of time. And I would like to highlight what I just said a few seconds ago. It's important to recognize that certain individuals might need to have access to retirement savings. So allowing access to retirement saving is a measure of last resort. It should be allowed, but it's a measure of last resort, and it should be based on individual specific exceptional circumstances. Somebody who has lost their job, who doesn't have, their salary has dropped enormously and they don't have other assets. Obviously, those individuals might need to have access to their retirement savings, but providing access to retirement savings across the entire population, even to individuals that have not suffered any job or wage losses due to COVID-19 is difficult to understand. So the message of the OECD has been always, yes, allow access to retirement saving as a measure of last resort, but based on individual specific exceptional circumstances. And it's important and it's essential that governments, as long as they can, they maintain programs subsidizing wages and subsidizing contributions. If savings into retirement income arrangements don't happen, there will be less income to finance retirement tomorrow. The next point I wanted to highlight before finishing is how do we go about in strengthening the resilience of retirement, how we go forward. Well, in this program, there has been a lot of discussion about issues that we find tremendously important in the analysis we have done in the OECD: automatic feature, default options, simple information and choice, financial incentives, and financial education, that all of them together can lead to better retirement outcomes. We have a lot of work explaining how this can be implemented in different retirement saving arrangements in different countries. Mechanisms such as automatic enrollment and escalation of contributions. Defaults are essential for people unable and unwilling to choose a contribution rate, a pension provider, an investment strategy, or a post-retirement product. Individuals in defined contribution plans have to make a lot of choice, and they need to be protected against the inability or willingness of making those choices, and defaults is inappropriate. And of course, there is many other approaches that involve communication and the use of pension statements. And again, COVID-19 has highlighted that people need savings for emergency situations. And there are a few countries that they have an interesting feature. They do have more than one long-term saving accounts. They have a retirement saving accounts in which access to those savings, long-term savings for retirement, is not granted, but they have at the same time an emergency saving account, long-term saving, where access under exceptional circumstances, loss of income, loss of employment, terminal illness, and others, is granted. And all the contributions to saving for the long term for retirement and split between the two. And at the end, the balances of the two are used to finance retirement. There are a few countries that have this feature, and it's an interesting feature to look into when we talk about what we can do to strengthen the resilience of retirement saving system going forward, together with the 5 issues I mentioned in the previous slide. And just to finalize, there is one issue that is now being discussed in many countries, and is how best to use, to invest all the assets that are earmarked for retirement in order to assist on the recovery, on ESG, on infrastructure, on technology development. Obviously, the message is, by all means, they should, pension funds and those assets earmarked for retirement should be invested on projects to assist on the recovery post-COVID, on ESG, on infrastructure, on technology development. But obviously, we need to do a proper monitoring, a proper supervision. It should not be invested on whatever projects. It should be invested on those investment opportunities that maximize retirement savings adjusted by risk and fees and charges. And always keeping in mind that we are doing all of this for the members, for the individuals who are saving for retirement or they are already retired. So it has to be done for them and depending on their wishes. And this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
You're welcome, Pablo. Thank you very much. So Vinicius, please, you like.
Thank you so much, and very glad to see a lot of colleagues on the table. A lot has been said, of course. Now I'd like to focus exclusively on the COVID, post-COVID world, with a broader lens of social protection, but also, of course, focusing on pensions. But we all know that Latin America and the Caribbean has been the hardest hit region so far. I say so far because we never know, both on health terms, but also on economic growth and labor issues now. So by far, we have the deepest, let's say, the most depressive figures in terms of economic growth, but also on jobs. Basically, we have lost 34 million jobs over the last 6 months. Unemployment has skyrocketed, and unemployment, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of people just drop out from the labor force. And we're trying to think why, because the region saw this coming as a tsunami coming from Asia, hitting Europe first, the US, and then and some countries were really tough in terms of measures and lockdowns and tried to contain the pandemics, and it simply didn't work. In both countries that were more like flexible, and countries that actually took very hard, rigid measures to contain, they are both, suffering the impact both on the health terms and economic terms. And a lot has to do with what Gustavo says, what we call the socioeconomic pre-existing conditions, to make an analogy to the COVID itself, which in our case, I think it's more, first, absolutely a high informality, which limits the impact, the capacity, the ability to reach out to those who need in terms of transfers, and also it's difficult to promote lockdowns in situations where people, living in houses with multiple families without social infrastructure, sanitation, and anything. Low coverage, social protection. So there was a stress test in our social protection schemes, and also in particular pension schemes, and they're not, really prepared, to absorb this type of shocks, and the lack of fiscal space. If you look at stimulus packages around the world, even if some countries in Latin America went really high in terms of dedicating an impressive amount of resources, I could quote Peru and Brazil, they are far beyond what's being allocated in developed countries. A lot of governments responded, and of course, measures targeting first, support to employment, avoiding, what Mariano said, or Olivia also mentioned this morning, the linkage between the company and the worker, trying to maintain the employment link. Others more support to companies, in particular small and micro enterprises, SMEs, and also support to income, which in some ways connected to social protection schemes like emergency bonuses or emergency transfers that would allow for some relief in terms of pandemic. So the world like a very comprehensive response in many countries, but it hasn't been enough. And this is quite clear when you see as well measures more related to the social security schemes. So basically, a lot of countries, they have provided some flexibility now in eligibility conditions to assess benefits, kind of social transfers to informal workers in particular, and also mechanisms to safeguard coverage of health coverage, in particular for those who are losing their jobs. And that's something that we also mentioned in the beginning. So there are many examples of how social protections or security schemes were like a changed, or there was an adoption of or adaptation of entitlement conditions and obligations to ensure easy and safe access to benefits, and also adaptation in terms of registration, delivery mechanisms, benefit modalities, including payment periodicity, which shows, and then back to what Mariano said, the necessity of institutions that are capable to respond and to make eligible conditions and access to benefits and payment modalities more accessible, including using technology. And I think that's quite important to highlight. So there is ample space for adjustments within what we have to respond to crisis and to move beyond and to actually to learn from the crisis and improve the way that we handle the protection of our citizens. But just to say that, of course, the crisis is the same way that has hit very hard because of the pre-existing conditions, and let's say these measures that have been used to preserve income, to preserve employment, to protect enterprises, they are our kind of ventilators. That, let's say, our system is in intensive care right now, and of course, it will leave scars for the future. Basically, we're saying inequalities will increase, and this is we saw already, of course, crisis it's exacerbating, new trends exacerbating, and those who do not have capacity to protect, they're becoming worse off. So this will continue, and if you see the early signals of recovery, of course, it's benefiting those who are more on the top deciles of the population. There is impact on gender as well, and that will affect the pension schemes. So basically, we are losing some gains that we had in terms of increasing female labor force participation, and now because of all the new conditions, including an equal distribution of the care work, we are coming back to like early 90s kind of indicators, increasing poverty and increase in inequality. So just to say, it's not just about protecting the funds, etc., but it's about having a comprehensive approach to respond to all these new challenges that are coming up. We're basically coming out of this, intensive care period in a very bad shape, and we need to use all the mechanisms that are available to try to recover fast. And of course, social protections, pensions, in particular pensions and social security, are among them. And there are two issues that I think it's quite important. First, a big push to universal social protection. So that's a clear message, regardless the condition of employment, and the link between employment and protection is something that has to be discussed. So the need for universal pensions or pensions, assistential pensions or non-contributory, enhanced non-contributory components on the pension schemes, that's quite clear. Because this will be, this is not going to be the first, of course, pandemic or the first crisis. So we will have other ones coming, and we need to be protected. So a lot of countries are regretting to not have a standard before. And actually, those countries who have a more comprehensive sort of protection schemes, they were better equipped to respond to the crisis, either by scaling up the existing schemes or adding temporary benefits on the top of those who are already being paid. So it's a kind of clear, so the pipes were there, so they were able to respond quite quickly. The second thing is to formalize the economy. So that, of course, this really structural issue that's not going to be solved in a couple of years. But now we have something that we have learned with the crisis that could help us, which is, of course, technology. Technology is there. And there's a strong push for this e-formalization type of process. Basically use technology to allow companies and workers to transition from informality to formality. So the same app that offers services and connects dependent workers, self-employed people to clients can also offer, for example, a pension plan or a health plan. So don't tell us that these people are not identified. They're identifiable because they're all connected, right? So we can use this connectivity as a pathway to formalization, and of course, add social protection schemes connected to this new reality. So these are two issues that I think are quite important to highlight, that we should perhaps learn from this crisis and invest in spending, in particular on universal social protection floors for all, and also formalization. On the top of that, a lot of countries are regretting to not have implemented, for example, unemployment insurance before. Unemployment insurance is one of the most important tools to respond to this type of situation, even in the case of a very large population of informal workers. It's possible to have kind of unemployment schemes that are not insurance based, but could also respond to this type and not undermine, for example, patient savings. So that's a kind of lesson, and we are working hard to try to get some countries to move forward on this direction. The connection between incomes and jobs with the promotion of decent work, super important, and with mechanisms to protect, in particular, the informal economy. So this is a huge opportunity to accelerate as well this kind of transformations that are needed in terms of our capacity to respond to previous crises. And let me conclude, just coming back to the scheme that Mariano presented in the beginning, because I think this is also time to come back to the basics, to the principles, to understand why we have this type of schemes and why they are needed in particular situations like this. So he mentioned, of course, sustainability, the issue of coverage and adequacy now, which are, of course, the three basic principles. I'll add efficiency now, because I think in particular situations like this one, and with all the gains and all the tools that we have now with technology, we cannot afford to pay, let's say, to pay very high or expressive administrative costs to any type of schemes. So this has to go down. We need to invest a lot in efficiency in terms of delivery. The second point, in addition to the three ones.
I'm so sorry, Vinicius. We are on the time. Please, yes. If you just 1 minute more, please.
1 minute more. Yeah, that's what I need.
Yeah. So, thank you. Sorry.
Efficiency, solidarity. So since we're becoming more unequal, we need to use these schemes to rebalance what has happened. And finally, the participation of, in particular, those who are concerned, the workers, the employers, and the retirees. They have to be part of all these decisions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for your discipline controlling time, because we have a lot of questions. I'm going to address those questions in order to have at least one for each one of you. But if someone likes to add anything, please feel free to do it. Let me see. First question could be, we can start for you, Vinicius. There is a question that says, the ILO promotes the social economy of solidarity as an alternative for recovery in the post-COVID period. How can these companies be professionalized in Latin America in such a way that they are not a welfare alternative and all of them pay taxes and or contribute to contributory pension systems?
Yeah, so basically so there are two elements. So the solidarity in the design of these schemes, which are funded not only by contributions by contributions, let's say, paid by companies or by taxes in general paid by companies, but also by general taxes. So this is something that goes beyond the company level. So that's a clearly, in terms of design, it's by general taxes, not something that relies. That's one dimension of the response. The second one, there are a lot of companies that do pay taxes, and there's a lot of companies that do not pay taxes. Actually, evasion in Latin America is one of the critical, and perhaps can help us on that. It's one of the issues that have to be tackled. We have a lot of loopholes, and in particular sectors that are booming in digital, in the digital area, they have a lot of benefits, so they're exploring a lot of holes in the legislation, and there's a real capacity to increase fiscal capacity to increase taxes, not to increase taxes, but to enhance the efficiency in the tax collection. That could help in terms of financing this type of benefits as well.
Okay, thank you, Vinicius. Gustavo, please. The question is refer to Latin America and especially Argentina. How do you see the implementation of systems not directly related to labor contributions?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. I will speak in general and not about one country, one region, because I think the question is valid in many contexts. And I think what I showed in one of my slides is that actually there's so much we can expect from the contributory pension schemes, and there is a space for the non-contributory pension schemes. Now, the question is more about, and I would like to link with the previous question, to what extent the development of non-contributory pension schemes will discourage or will go against the incentives to participate in a contributory pension scheme. And I don't have an easy answer to this question. I don't think anyone has an easy answer to this question, but I think the way to guide our own thinking is to think of the non-contributory component of the social insurance as something that has to provide some basic level of income in a targeted manner, and try to think of that. This is a way we think at the World Bank as the main focus of the fiscal support, of the government support to the pension schemes. While the income replacement should be more related to contributory pension schemes. So, to be short, I think, in order to have a non-contributory system that does not discourage people from contributing, you need to have two separate things with the non-contributory and the contributory. The contributory is where you will find the income replacement. The non-contributory is where you will find a cushion to prevent old people from falling in poverty in the old age.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gustavo. Next question is for Saba. The question is, central banks' response to the COVID crisis has been impressive, pushing further down interest rates. Although that response is reasonable to restore growth and financial stability, a collateral effect has been an increase in the price of retirement products like annuities. What can you say about the trade-off between current economic challenges versus future retirement challenges? And how can countries find a better balance down the road? You are mute, Saba. Yeah.
But I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything important. So, yeah, both Pablo Antolin and myself responded to this question already. I think the gist of our answer was that central banks have a much broader set of objectives, and I think I believe that central banks are actually pursuing the right policies, because unless you manage to put growth back on track, you will have much bigger problems than a temporary increase in annuity prices. The other thing is that let's assume for a moment that the price increase of annuities is a temporary phenomenon. Maybe it lasts more than a year, maybe more than two, but it's still a temporary phenomenon. And regulators may have other instruments to address this problem than fiddling around just for the sake of annuities or just for the sake of the pension system with interest rates. I would certainly not encourage countries to consider minimum guaranteed annuities. It takes us into a very different type of discussion, but it can be discussed. But also, let's remember, do individuals have the opportunity to delay their retirement? If they think that the annuity price is not favorable for the time being, they also have a bit of a wiggle room. So it's not just the central banks. We have the government. Let's assume for a moment the central banks are independent of government. We have the government, we have the individuals. And across these players, I'm not sure that central banks should follow a different interest rate policy just to help pension schemes. Thank you.
You're welcome, Saba. Pablo, we have a question for you. This is the most fashionable issue, I'm afraid, or one of the most. The risk of withdrawals from pension funds before retirement is very high, precisely in Latin America countries, where the system is unique or not integrated into the defined benefit system from which no funds can be drawn. The attendee says Colombia and Peru. Will it be a valid argument to protect these funds if individual capitalization systems were more strongly integrated with defined benefit components?
Do you want to answer in English or in Spanish?
No, as you prefer.
Well, for the sake of the others to understand what I'm saying, it's very difficult for me to see how can you make a DC system into a DB system unless you introduce some type of minimum guarantee, and then you have a hybrid system. Yes, you could do that, obviously, but the access to retirement savings in public pensions or in DB plans, you can also have access to retirement savings. The mechanism is different. In funded DB plans, there have been examples in which the pension fund, the industry pension fund, or of the firm pension funds allows, in certain circumstances, to people to get the money. In particular, if they leave the job because of the impact of a recession like COVID-19, they might have access to some of their resources. The point of this is that at the end of the day, access to retirement savings, whether in a DB or in a DC world, should be linked only to the fact that is an exceptional hardship circumstances. The problem in some countries is that they have allowed access to retirement savings to everybody, even people who have not lost their job, they have not seen a reduction in their retirement income, have the opportunity of accessing the retirement savings. And that, from the point of view of the OECD, is not correct. People who have lost their job, people who have a substantial loss of income, having access to retirement savings because obviously they don't have any other assets, which this is also a very important issue. They don't have any other assets. It's something that then it should be granted. On top of that, some of the plans that have been implemented have allowed access without having to pay taxes. And as some of you know, when you contribute in this defined contribution in individual accounts, you don't pay taxes, and everything is based on the marginal tax rate, which means the high income people get a bigger break from having access. So the high income people have not seen their income reduce, or if they have seen their income reduce, they have access. They have not lost their job, but if they have lost their job, they have assets. And on top of that, they are getting their savings with tax breaks that is financed by the entire population.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Pablo. And one question for Mariano. is how feasible would it be carry out pension reforms to adjust the contributory pension system from a legislative perspective? This because in El Salvador decisions, I'm afraid is in other countries as well, are political and often don't have a technical fund and depend on the convenience of the governing party. Should the pension system not depend on a legislative decision? What do you think, Mariano?
Thanks, Diego, for the question. I mean, I think as a general principle, that this applies to El Salvador and applies to many, I think probably all countries in the world. Yeah. Ideally, there should be some consensus in the country or where the pension system should go, where are the main challenges, where are the main solutions. We all know that if there is a lot of polarization on, and we see this in Latin America and many other countries, like how the pension system should be financed, how what are the key parameters that should be the target, then we have issues, no? Because there's going to be a political turnover, and we all know that, and that will happen in the countries. So one government implemented one type of system, and the next government implemented a completely different system. That is problems for any kind of system that you want to implement. So yes, as a principle, there should be some consensus. Then it comes to the question of how do you build that consensus? Should be that taken completely away from the current legislative body. So that's difficult to implement. And so I go back to my point in my presentation. We should try, to the extent that is possible, build institutions that are somehow apolitical or the link from the political system, and monitor the system, make proposals of adjustment. Obviously, that body should somehow convey what is the consensus of the country of what the system should be. But at the end of the day, the implementation of what that body is suggesting will come down to the people that are governing in that particular time. And we observe this in many countries that, you know, you can have the best rule of adjustment or the best system that will be adapted, but at the end of the day, the people or the government that has to implement it has to somehow get some of the political pressure. And we've seen this in Spain recently and in some countries in the region. So the short answer would be try to get those institutions that are somehow beyond the government that is ruling in a particular moment, try to get that consensus. But at the end of the day, I think there has to be some going back to whoever is ruling in that particular moment.
Thank you, Mariano. We have some room for 1 minute more for each one of you. So please, a final recommendation from your point of view, your institution point of view, about the future of pensions. Mariano, would you start, please?
Sure. Thanks a lot. And I don't know whether it's a recommendation or not, but I think I would like to comment on something that Vinicius said, and I think others too, and we have been working a lot at the IDB, which is given our informal labor markets, to what extent can we go forward that universal social protection system, which I think is a very powerful idea, and to what extent that protection system can be the link from the job status, which I think parts of it can clearly be the link, probably health and you know, poverty alleviation and non-contributory pensions. That's some things that can be the link, and to what extent there are things that cannot be the link. And I think trying to find that point of transiting towards universal protection systems, but at the same time having a labor market that still generates revenues to finance other things that are very important, like, you know, income retirement, disability insurance, etc., etc. And I think that's a fine line. I think countries will have to make important decisions, especially in these times. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariano. Gustavo, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Let me take one point that has also been taken in other sessions, which is the emergency response to unemployment and the fact that some countries have responded allowing people to take money from their pension funds. I mentioned, incidentally, there were no questions, but I'm sure there must be reactions. The fact that at least in the case of the informal sectors, we are thinking of moving towards some kind of multi-risk, multi-product types of interventions. And I think while we can talk a lot about these disadvantages in terms of disincentives or incentives for people to withdraw money from their pension funds in at times of emergency, and this is something negative and something that has to be kept under control, and that this is something where compensatory measures need to be set in place. Not much has been said about the incentive for those who are not covered by any social insurance or pension system. And in this case, I think we might want to look in the case of the informal arrangement of some kind of combination of risks that the people value having, for which the people value having some kind of savings and protections, with those for which people value less. And I think unemployment is a risk that people have learned to value. If unemployment doesn't happen, then maybe having some kind of combined risk scheme or mechanism can provide for retirement savings if the money is not good. So I think we have to look at not only the negative side, but also the positive side of trying to match different forms of long-term savings.
Thank you, Gustavo. And Saba, your final turn.
Thank you. I will only share with you I will share with you my personal opinion, not an institutional stance. I would like to make 2 points. One is that it's very important to remember electoral demographics. The electorate in every country is aging, which will make pension reforms more and more difficult as we go ahead in time. So whenever governments think about whether they should introduce a reform today or maybe in 10 years' time, they need to look at what the age structure of the electorate will be and how that will influence the likelihood of a successful reform. And the other thing I wanted to say is, in my mind, there's absolutely no question that we should go towards a universal basic pension. And even more so, I think that if for fiscal reasons, because of fiscal constraints, a choice needs to be made between a universal basic pension and continuing to support otherwise unsustainable earnings-related traditional social security schemes, then universal basic pensions are more important, because in the grand scheme of things, poverty alleviation is more important than consumption smoothing. And then the real question is just, are we going there in an orderly fashion, following a policy, or are we just ending up in a new situation and give up the chance to design who the losers and who the winners would be as a result of a paradigm shift? Thank you.
Thank you, Saba. Pablo?
Well, I'm going to say something that my previous colleagues have said. It is essential to have social protection at retirement, and the government should provide social protection at retirement. That's essential. But on top of it, it's also essential that people save for retirement. This idea of welfare and insurance. Obviously, saving for retirement is for retirement. It should not be granted access in general. And COVID-19 and shocks like COVID-19 should be financed from the public purse, not from retirement savings.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Vinicius, last minute, please.
Yeah, just to say that I think the pathway towards universal protection should build on already existing mechanisms, and in particular, we should look at how to expand fiscal space to meet these requirements. If you do the calculations, you figure out there's not much that is needed to close coverage gaps in many sectors, and not much if you compare what could happen. Just to make a point that the region last year was coming from a wave of social instability that could pick up again this year. And in some cases, pensions were at the core of the protest as well. So there is a kind of a predisposition of a moment in which the crisis that was a health crisis that became a socioeconomic crisis could become a political crisis. So this is what at stake now. And invest in social pensions, in universal protection, it's less costly than confronting a political crisis in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your participation.